We're holding Pei Amud Aleph. We were discussing the setup of the small patch where you plant different types of vegetables. So you could set them up, have 5 types of plants, all planted in the same 6 by 6 tfachim. And it's based on the fact that the rule is that plants grow from the soil, from the ground, only from the area around them within 3 tvachim or a bit less to each direction. More than that, a tefach and a half. A tefach and a half per a plant is where they grow from, and the rest they don't grow. The rest they don't grow from it. So
it's like a circle. Tefach and a half from the left and tefach and a half from the right.
Right.
But it's still circle.
Still 3 tvachim. You're right. There's still 3 tvachim. 3 tvachim per plant where they grow. And therefore, the distance between 2 plants has to be 3 tvachim.
3 tvachim.
3 tvachim in order to make sure that they're not growing from the same piece of land. So the question is, where did the Chacham get this information from? Right? So again, we never asked such a question, but I guess it seems either that the Gemara assumed that the Chacham got this information from some sort of scientists, and therefore they're asking, since when do they know this information? From which soil do plants grow? Or, if you want to see a bit deeper, where do we see that Torah relates to such a thing? Chacham get everything from Torah. Where do we see that the Torah discusses where things grow from? From which area in the land do they grow from? Where do we see such a topic? Says the Gemara like this: the kimluhu the Rabbanan know the chamsha b'shita layankim yadodi. 5 plants within 6 by 6 tfachim. So then the middle one does not grow from the same land as the ones on the side. The ones on the side are not a problem because they're clearly separate, and therefore the middle one is fine. Says the Gemara, how do we know the kim lahul rabbanon? This rule which Rabbanon know milsei. How do we know that it's something? How do we know that it's real? How do we know that we could rely on it? So Rashi says, he's just trying to calm us down. He's not really asking the question. How do we know the Chachamim know? He's like calming us down. You might wonder, where did they get this information from? I'll tell you where they get this information from. I'll tell you. The Amar Reb Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Mai dichsiv. There's a pasuk which says, "Loisasig gvul reacha." Don't intrude to the boundary of your friend. Asher gadlu rishonim, which the older ones have made those boundaries. Simply speaking, we're talking about an Eretz Yisrael. Every shevet and every family has his own section or his own portion in Eretz Yisrael. And if you move the border, move the boundary, you're stealing his land, but it's a special Isser for Eretz Yisrael that you're ruining the boundaries that were set up by Yeshua, by explanation from Moshe. You're ruining those boundaries. But he's giving a different pshat. He's saying like this. The pasuk is saying, don't plant things too close to the border. Nothing to do with Kalayim. Don't plant your plants very close to your friend's field, because you're taking away the nutrients, whatever there is in the soil that will make your friend's plants grow. You're taking it away. You have to make a space. And the space has to be 3 tvachim. So Leisasik Vul Reacha is explaining as in, don't plant things too close to your friend's field. Says the Gemara, Gvul Shegavlu Rishonim, the boundary which the olden days have set up this boundary, that's how much space you need between one plant and another. Leisasik, don't intrude to that boundary, to that border. My Gavlu Rishonim, who are these older people which made that boundary? So he's going to say like this. There's a pasuk which describes about Esau, that he chased away the original nation of his land, Seir. The nation was called Chayri, and he chased them away. And it calls the nation Yoshvei Haaretz, the settlers of the land. Now, usually the pasuk would say Yoshvei Haaretz Hazois, the ones that are residents of this particular land. When it says the residents of the land, it sounds like they're the ones that are residents on land, on earth. So the question is, why is their title residents of earth? So the Brisa will explain that they knew the earth very well. They knew the nature of the earth. They knew what soil is good for which plant. And therefore, they knew very well how the soil works and how the earth works and how it makes things grow. So they passed on this information, and that's where the Chachamim got their information of how much distance you need between one plant and another, that they shouldn't grow. They shouldn't be stealing each other's nutrients. That they should be growing from their own piece of land. Let's see it inside. It says like this. It says in a pasuk, it counts the family of Seir, which they were the native residents of Seir, of the land of Esau. Says the Gemara, Tu kuli alma yeshur akiyahu. Everyone else are residents of the sky, residents of heaven, and only Seir are residents of earth. Ela shoyibikim biyishuva shel aretz. They knew very well how to settle the land, what to use for what. Shoyoyim, they would say, Meloi konezel zayis. Kon is a certain measurement that is used in Sefer Yecheskel. Take this measurement of land, right over here. This is a good place to plant an olive tree. It's the best for an olive tree. Meloi konezeh likfanim. This measurement over here is good for vine trees. Meloi konezeh l'ta'enim. This measurement is good for fig trees. Fine. That's what they were called the Yoshvei Haaretz. Based on that, the Chayri, why are they called Chayri? Shemirichim es. They would smell. They would say, yeah, this is a good place for olives. The Chivi, there's a source that tells us that the Chayri were also called Chivi. Tosa says it's not the Chivi from the 7 Umis, from the Shiva Umis. It's another nation which was also called Chivi, because we see that one of Esau's wives was once called Chayri and one's called Chivi. So you know that Chivi and Chayri are two names of the same nation. Why were they called Chivi? They would also put it in their mouth and taste it. Kichivi, like a snake which eats earth. So they would put it into their mouth and they taste it and spit it out, obviously, but they would taste and they would see that it's what you could plant in this particular piece of land. Right? Okay, that's the only part that we need for our sugya. So we see that all the way back to Esau's times, or before Esau, there was a nation which knew exactly what grows from what. So they passed on the information. I don't know why they passed it on to the Yiddish Chachamim. Maybe they were upset at Esau for chasing them away. So they went and told some secrets to the Yidden. I'm not sure. But either way, the Yidden got the information that how much space you need for each plant to grow. Again, you could say deeper, the Torah relates to such a knowledge. And therefore the Torah carries within it that knowledge. And therefore the Chacham were able to get that knowledge from Torah. Maybe that's pshat. Fine. Now a different pshat altogether. Rav Acher bar Yaakov Omer, a different pshat. Why they're called Chayri? Shenasu b'nei Chayri min ichseim. They were freed from all their worries. When someone has lots of possessions, you have to take care of them. You have to make sure no intruders. Once they're chased away from the land, they're free. They have no worries. They're just paupers. They're just, no land, no nothing. They're free from any worries. So that's why they were called Chayri. They were freed from their land. Fine. They don't have to plow. They don't have to plant. They're free. No worries. Okay. That's that. Going back to the fact that you have 6 by 6 tfachim, and you could plant over there 5 types of plants. Amar Rav Asi, or some say it was Rav Ashi. Aruga toy choshesh. When you measure these 6 tfachim, you're talking about the center of this patch. Chutz migvulel. We will see soon there's a specific measurement that you always have to put as a border around every patch, every place you plant something, you have to put like a border around. So that border, we'll see, has a certain measurement to it. Don't think that you could include that border into 6 tfachim, which basically means you're going to be planting, let's say, in 5 tfachim, or 4 tfachim, 4 by 4 tfachim, and you could squish in there 5 plants. No. You could squish 5 plants in a place net 6 tfachim, 6 by 6 tfachim, excluding the pathway around, as we'll see soon, which was left empty. Tanya Nami Hochi, we have another brayso which says, Aruga toichoshisha, a typical patch that you could squish in a few types of plants is 6 tfachim, but that's the actual place you're planting. And gvuleo bekama. How much border is there? Kedetanan Rabbi Yehuda Omer, roichav kimuloi roichav parsa. There has to be enough for 1 foot to walk around. The point is you want to walk around and water it, take care of it. If you're going to step on the plants, you're going to ruin it. So around each place that you want to plant things, you have to put some space, walking space, and you can walk like this, foot, in front of a foot, so it's enough to have a space for 1 foot, for one of your feet, and that's the space you put. So when we're counting 6 tfachim, is besides this extra space. Fine. Okay. Fine. Rabbi Yehuda is speaking about when you want to make a full patch of one type of plant, then you want to plant next to it a different type of plant, a different vegetable. So then you have to put a space, the amount that you would walk in order to water that particular patch, and that indicates that it's a separate patch. It's not the same thing. That's how much you have to put in between these 2 patches. Right? Actually not. It's not between 2 patches, between a field and a patch. If you have a full field of a certain plant, and you want to plant a different type of plant, you have to put a separation. So you put that space where you would walk, the walking space, and then you could plant another patch of vegetables. Fine. So we know now that when we say you could plant in a patch 5 types of vegetables, it's excluding the space around it, which is the width of a foot, which you have to leave around it besides those 6 by 6 tefachim. Fine. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get this that you have to leave that space of 1 foot? Because it says that in Mitzrayim they would water the fields by walking around. They would carry the water from the canal, and they would come and water the field, and they would water the field with their feet. Why is the pasuk mentioning the feet? You don't water with the feet, you water with your hands. But you have to have a space to walk with your feet, and I guess the idea is it says B'loshin yochid, b'raglicha. Not b'raglecha, but b'raglicha. Which means that the space of 1 foot is enough in order to water a field. You have to have that space to walk around. You can walk foot by foot, and you can water the field. Fine. Now, so what do we learn from this? Ma regel tefach. What's the width of a typical foot? A tefach. So when the pasuk says you water the field with your feet, it's coming to tell you the measurement of the border. There has to be an empty space around it if you want to plant something else next to it. There has to be an empty space, a tefach. So basically this patch we were speaking about is basically 8 by 8 tefachim. 6 by 6 you're planting on the edges, on the borders, and the one in the middle. Then you have a tefach all around empty to be able to walk around and treat this patch of vegetables. Right? Okay. Discussing that subject. Amar Rav Aruga Bechurba Shaninu. Remember, we spoke about again that a person is planting on the four borders of this patch, and then one plant in the middle, and the four borders are clearly separate from each other because they're going in different directions, so we don't care about the space over there. And then there's one plant in the middle, which there we care about the space. Says Rav, 1 second. Where's this patch? If it's in your field and you have other patches of other vegetables near it, so then this border is neighboring a different border. If it's neighboring a different border and they're both going in the same direction, so then you have to have a space of 3 tvachim in between. Not 3 tvachim inclusive, but you have to have somewhat of a space of 3 tvachim over here. Now, the typical border we just said is how much? 1 tefach. 1 tefach is not good enough. 1 tefach is too close. You have 2 lines of different types of plants right next to each other. There's only a tefach in between. That's no good. So this Mishnah must be speaking about that you're planting vegetables in a deserted place. For example, you have a broken house and you have the land over there, and you say, let's plant some vegetables over here. There's nothing else around it. And then you're not getting into any trouble for the borders neighboring with a different border. That's what Rav says. It must be aruga bechurba shaninu. It must be that this patch was planted in an empty space, and only then it could fit that you're planting on each border a different type of plant, taking up the whole border besides just the corner to make some space, and then one plant in the middle. Says the Gemara, that's if you're assuming that the border was planted from end to end. But if you're going to say that you can make a distance, in other words, you plant one patch, not the whole border. You plant 2.5 tefachim. And then the other border, you do another 2.5 tefachim. And you have a tefach space in between. So with the angle in between those two, you'll be fine. I didn't make the exact calculation. But if you'll have a tefach width plus the fact that they have a full tefach this way in between them. So you have one tefach this way, one tefach this way. So then if you want to make the angle, what is it going to add up to be? 1 second. I don't know if it adds up. The chayil will be, 1 second. You can unmute. Huh? Talk. Unmute yourself.
I'm trying to talk. Okay. Are you talking about right angle?
So it's in a triangle, yes.
So you have right angle and then the line here.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you calculated this length, right?
Yeah. It's a tefach by a tefach, basically, they have in between. They have like a square of a tefach by a tefach.
A square is different.
Yeah. No, so the angle will be, it won't be 3 tefachim. Good.
It will not be 3 tefachim.
Right. I don't know how exactly the calculation works, but Rashi says that's good enough because they're separate and they have that space in between. That'll be good enough. Maybe because it looks separate, with Rashi's opinion that looking separate is good enough. They're clearly from a different patch. They have the space in between. They're a bit distant from each other. So then it'll be fine. If that will be fine, then why does Rav have to say that he's planting this patch in an empty space? He could be planting it in a field with other patches around it, with a tefach space in between all of them. And you're moving all the borders a bit, one upward, one downward, and therefore they're not parallel to each other. So they have this tefach by tefach space in between, with a clear line in between, in general, differentiating, separating between these two patches. So it'll be fine. Says the Gemara, "V'ha'ikam mokem kronis." Says Rashi, this means you could push them up each to a different corner. And then you could plant 5 plants in a patch, even between other patches. So what's the problem? Amri Bey Rav Mishmei de Rav. So the yeshiva of Rav said in the name of Rav, Rav understood that the Mishnah is talking about that 2 of the sides, as you look in Rashi, they have pictures of both of these things. So the first example, how you could make them not parallel. You have those 9 patches that Rashi has a picture of. So we're talking about the middle one. The middle one is between all these 8 other patches, and there's a tevach space between all of them. And then there's all of the plants are not parallel to each other, and therefore it will be okay to plant it that way. But Rav understood, like the bottom picture, that 2 of the sides were planted all the way along, from beginning to end, including the corners. And therefore, the way we make the 5 types of plants is slightly different than we said in the beginning. You have right and left all the way across the border, 6 tefachim. Then you have 1 small plant on the top, 1 small plant on the bottom, and 1 small plant in the middle. So you have 5 types of plants, a bit differently organized. That's what Rav understood. Says the Gemara, why? 1 second. Why do you have to say that the Mishnah is talking about that you planted the whole side, and then you can't plant anything else next to it, and you have to say you planted in a deserted place? Say that you didn't fill up till the end, and you could move it around a bit, and then you could put it in the middle of a field. So the problem is, even if you didn't do it, since this is a 1 patch, and it's very likely that you will do it, you won't realize that it's a problem. So Rav said you cannot plant this patch with this whole kunz amongst other patches. It's a gzeira. It's not just because I think that's what we're talking about. It's a gzeira. Let's see it inside. Let him plant things around it. Who asked you? Don't fill it up in the middle. Don't fill it up inside. Don't fill up the whole border. Leave some space, and you could do something next to it. Why do you have to fill up the whole border and then you can't plant anything else next to it? So you're right. The problem is that you might plant the whole border. Okay. Let's just finish these few lines. It's a new subject. 1 second. Basically, the Gemara's question is like this. Since the patches are clearly separate from each other, when you have patches which are separate from each other, the Gemara assumed that the fact that they look separate should be good enough. We see this concept by 2 fields that are near each other. As long as you could recognize that they're 2 separate fields, even if they're very close to each other, it's fine. The example brought is if you have a pointy end of 1 field, then you have another field beginning right next to it. But the fact that this field is ending to narrow end by the border of this field makes it very clear that they're 2 separate fields, and then it's fine. So here also, so what if I plant the whole border? You can see clearly that it's 2 separate patches, and then it's considered separate, because we said earlier, Kilei Zroim has a lot to do with what you see. So you can see it's separate. Says no. A field is a big thing. A patch is a small thing. If you have a patch near a field near a patch, or 2 fields next to each other, and they clearly seem separate, they're clearly separate. If you have a bunch of small patches, and they look separate, it's one big mishmash. It's one big field. So that's why it's not good enough. Let's just see it inside. It says the Gemara, it should be similar to the pointy end of a vegetable field that's neighboring, that's just next to a different field of a different type of plant, and we say it's fine. If the end, the narrow end of a vegetable field was touching right next to a different field, it's fine. Mutter, you can see clearly that it's the end of a field. Says the Gemara, Ein Roish Terbar Ruga. In a small patch, you can't say that. In a field, you can say that. In a patch, you can't say that. That's the end of Rav's opinion. So, to summarize, we spoke about this patch that you could plant things on all edges and one in the middle. It's based on the fact that in Kili Zroim, things have to look separate, or they should not be growing from the same soil. And Rabbanan had a Kabbalah. They knew that if it's spaced somewhat 3 tefachim from each other, although there's part of the plant within the 3 tefachim, but there's like 3 tefachim for each plant, then they don't grow from the same land, and therefore it's a good enough space. So where did they get that from? From the Chayrim. The Chayrim knew exactly which piece of land can grow which plant. They smelled it, they tasted it, and from there we have the information. It's reliable information. Then we spoke about that each patch has to have a border for you to walk around and take care of it. And therefore, when we're measuring 6 tefachim, we're not measuring the border. We're measuring the inside of this patch. Now, why does this patch a tefach? Comes Rav and he says that the only time you're allowed to plant these 5 plants is if it's in a deserted area. If it's in a field, you're not allowed to. Why? You could move the 5 types of plants and make them not parallel to each other and different patches, and then it should be fine. So what are you right? But what if he won't do it? We're afraid. Says the Gemara, and if he won't do it, what's the problem? You can see clearly it's a separate patch. No. By patches, it's not enough if you see clearly it's a separate patch. A patch is a small thing. It's part of a big field. And therefore, it's not good enough that it looks separate. You must make the proper separation, and therefore you cannot do this whole kuntz if it's amongst other patches, according to Rav. We'll soon see Shmuel's opinion.